It doesn't matter in which sport, as a coach, you always aim to provide the best possible training to athletes. Compared to a one-on-one session, during a group session, this is generally more challenging because you're dealing with multiple athletes who will vary in skill level across different tasks that are being practiced. During a basketball training, for instance, one basketball player might be very good at free throws, but struggle with three-point shots, while for another player, the opposite is the case. This has the consequence that every player has slightly different practice needs, also in terms of task difficulty. Besides, as a coach, you often have a specific practice goal in mind. In most situations, you likely aim for that athletes will learn the most, but in specific situations, for instance just before a game, the goal might be to provide some extra motivation and encouragement so that the athletes will start the upcoming game with confidence. So for an appropriate practice design, several factors need to be taken into account. In this knowledge clip, we will, based on the Optimal Challenge Framework and other scientific insights, provide a guideline that can be implemented in your own practice design. The question we will address in this knowledge clip is: how should a coach vary the difficulty of practice to achieve a specific practice goal, taking into account that players show differences in skill level in a task? We will take a basketball training as an example, in which players differ in their skill levels, being either experts or intermediates, in two different tasks, three-point shots and free throws, and in the situations of two different goals of practice, either maximizing learning benefits or maximizing rewards and successes. A very influential theory that has also received much support and will help us address our research question is the Optimal Challenge Framework, proposed by Guadagnoli and Lee in 2004. According to this framework, how much can be learned from practice depends on the functional task difficulty that's provided during practice. The functional task difficulty refers to the task difficulty relative to an athlete's skill level. For instance, the functional task difficulty is lower for an athlete who is skilled in three-pointers compared to someone who is less proficient. The higher the functional task difficulty during practice, the more errors will be made, resulting in information from which can be learned from. However, task difficulty should not become too high, as too many errors will affect the athlete's motivation and will limit learning, as depicted in C. In the case of functional task difficulty being too low, depicted in A, only few mistakes are made, resulting in a less than optimal amount of information from which can be learned from. Therefore, the Optimal Challenge Framework, as its name suggests, implies that there is an optimal functional task difficulty that results in an optimal amount of information and learning. This is depicted in section B. Without going into too much details, here are a few examples of how to increase or decrease functional task difficulty. In 2022, Hodge and Lowe's expanded the Optimal Challenge Framework with the aim of bringing the framework closer to practice by providing guidelines for practice design. They identified 3 different practice goals: practice to learn, where the focus is on maximizing learning benefits; practice to maintain, where the focus is on maximizing rewards and successes; and practice to transfer, where the focus is on maximizing performance for competition. As mentioned in the introduction, in this knowledge clip, we only focus on the first 2 goals: practice to learn and practice to maintain. Nevertheless, it's good to know that there is a third goal. As depicted in this table, depending on the desired goal, the task difficulty present during practice should align accordingly. As shown, the functional task difficulty should be higher when the desired goal is practice to learn compared to when the desired goal is practice to maintain. This, again, is because the higher functional task difficulty leads to more mistakes, resulting in more information from which can be learned from. This is accompanied by a lower performance and fewer rewards and successes. Conversely, a slightly lower task difficulty, in the case of practice to maintain, leads to fewer mistakes but more rewards and successes. Alright, imagine that based on the optimal challenge framework, you as a coach have determined the goal of practice and know how to increase and decrease functional task difficulty. How do you know in what situations you have to increase or decrease the functional task difficulty? A relevant study that sheds light on this question is a study conducted by Coughlin et al. In 2014. In this study, Gaelic football players of two different skill levels, experts and intermediates, practiced two types of kicks for 4 weeks. Kicking accuracy was measured before, immediately after, and 2 weeks after the practice period. During the practice period, participants themselves could decide the frequency of kicks, which kick they attempted to improve, and the order in which they practiced the two types of kicks. The results showed that the expert group primarily focused on practicing the kick they were less proficient in and showed a clear learning effect, as their kicking accuracy was significantly improved 2 weeks after the practice period compared to before the practice period. Conversely, the intermediate group primarily focused on practicing the kick they were more proficient in and did not show improvements if their kicking accuracy of 2 weeks after the practice period was compared to the kicking accuracy before the practice period. Additionally, all football players were asked how demanding and enjoyable their own training was. The experts rated their practice as more demanding and less enjoyable compared to the intermediate group. However, one critical note should be made, and that is that the intermediate group actually did improve after training to some degree, but just not enough to speak of a clear learning effect when using statistics. When considering these results in relation to the optimal challenge framework, we can conclude that experts naturally tend to lean towards practice to learn as a practice goal, as they show a clear learning effect and perceive their own designed practice as more demanding and less enjoyable, while intermediates tend to lean towards practice to maintain as a practice goal, as they do not show a clear learning effect and perceive their own designed practice as less demanding and more enjoyable. Alright, let's try to answer our question. As we have seen with the optimal challenge framework, the functional task difficulty present during practice should align accordingly with the desired goal of practice. In the case of practice to learn, the functional task difficulty should be higher than in the case of practice to maintain. Besides, the study by Coughlin et al. Showed that the goal that's naturally pursued by the athlete is dependent on the athlete's skill level. This provides an insight into when, as a coach, you should adjust the task difficulty to achieve the practice goal. This is necessary in case the athlete's natural practice goal does not align with the desired practice goal you have as a coach. Now we arrive at our guideline for considering two different skill levels, experts and intermediates, and two practice goals, practice to learn and practice to maintain. In the case of aiming for practice to learn, a higher functional task difficulty should be present. As experts already tend to naturally practice with this goal in mind, they need less guidance and may benefit from self-control. Intermediates, however, should be actively guided to increase the functional task difficulty. For the goal of practice to maintain, a lower functional task difficulty should be present. In this case, experts are the ones who should be actively guided to decrease the functional task difficulty. Conversely, intermediates already tend to naturally practice with this goal in mind and need less guidance and may benefit from self-control. Let's go to the case of the basketball training, where you as a coach are dealing with both experts and intermediates in the different tasks. As a coach, you can make a selection of players who are relatively better at three-point shots than free throws and vice versa. In the case where practice to learn is desired, you can allow these selections to practice more on their own, since the players, now all considered as experts, naturally train in this manner. However, if practice to maintain is desired, it's the coach's task to reduce the functional task difficulty. This is just a guideline, and of course, in the case that you deal with players who can be considered intermediates or experts in both tasks, you can deviate from it. This knowledge clip introduced the optimal challenge framework, emphasizing the significance of task difficulty and various practice goals. It then provided guidelines for coaches and when and how to guide players to achieve the optimal task difficulty based on a specific practice goal. Thanks for watching, and for those who want to learn more, here's the reference list.